Hello students. Now do you try to mind the noise in the background? But today we're going to be looking at how to actually name the salt produced in a neutralization reaction. Okay? Now what I'd like you to do is to ensure you've got all your equipment with you before you do anything. Okay? So I'd like you to pause the video and check that you've got your pen, you've got your pencil, you've got your ruler, and your green pen. So again, pause the video. When you've gathered all of this, press play. Okay, now this is actually our retrieval practice for today. I would like you to actually match the name of the acid to the base. Well, it's not just the acid that is there, but match the acid or the base to its formula. So I would actually like you to actually time this. I'm sure you've got your phone with you. I would actually like you to time yourself 30 seconds to actually match it, okay? To even challenge yourself even more, give yourself 20 seconds to carry out this matching, okay? So again, pause the video and carry out this activity. When you're ready, we go. All right, I do believe you're done now, okay? Obviously, we've got the extension question as well, okay? And it's asked you, what ions do acid contains and what ions do alkali contains as well. And we're going to continue this. Now, let's go, just go to the next slide. Now, so let's match this. Sulfuric acid, this is actually what the formula for sulfuric acid is. So H2SO4, hydrochloric acid is HCl, nitric acid is HNO3, potassium hydroxide is actually KOH, copper oxide is actually CuO, and sodium hydroxide is actually NaOH. If you got yourself a full mark, give yourself a score. And also, if you haven't got your full marks, that is fine. What's important is actually you making your corrections using your green pen. Now, for the extension question, okay, acid contains hydrogen ions, okay? That is so important for you to remember. Acid contains hydrogen ions, okay? And alkali contains hydroxide ions, if I'm making sense. And the two put together actually make water, and that is how water is made, okay, during the reaction between alkalis and acid. That is how you get your water. The hydrogen ion dissociates from the acid and the hydroxide ion dissociates from the alkali, okay, to form water, if I'm making sense. All right, now, our success criteria is to be able to observe a neutralization reaction where the salt is made from a base. Technically, we cannot do that because it's meant to be a lab demonstration, but we cannot do that because we're learning from home. And hopefully, the main thing we're actually going to be doing is practicing how to name salt through neutralization reactions. Okay, now, and that is what we're going to do today. Okay, this is actually a fairly short topic. We're just going to take some practice. So now the first question is, what is the name of the reaction when an acid reacts with a base? What do you think that is? Neutralization. Okay, now the next question I want you to do in your book is, what are the products made during a neutralization reaction? Again, get your pen, pause the video, and answer that question. Okay, I'm going to give us 1 minute. When you're ready, press play. All right, that should actually take us less than 1 minute. It should be salt plus water. These are the products from neutralization. Now, the last question from this part is, what is the name of the salt produced when copper oxide reacts with nitric acid? Can you figure that out? Again, pause the video. When you're ready, press play. All right, I'm sure you should be able to say the salt is actually called copper nitrate. Now, do not worry because we're actually going to be doing more practice questions on this, okay? And this is what we're going to be doing. Now, what I want you to do, oops, I just give you the answer, but that's fine. Now, this question says silver oxide reacts with something, give us silver chloride and water. Remember, the hydrogen ion comes from the acid, and the hydroxide ion comes from what? The alkali. Okay, we know that the oxygen is coming from silver, so the rest should come from hydrochloric acid. Okay, so silver oxide reacting with hydrochloric acid actually gives us silver chloride plus water. Right, the next one, write down what is missing this time. This time we've got sulfuric acid reacting with an alkali that gives us copper sulfate and water. Now What you should notice about this reaction is the very, very fact that whenever you're writing the salt, okay, whenever you are writing the salt, the first part of the name of the salt, for example, silver chloride, the first part is actually the metal. It takes its first name from metal, okay? In this case, obviously, I'm going to tell you and talk about that example again. Silver oxide, silver is the metal there, okay? It's the metal there. So for the name of the salt, the silver comes first, the metal comes first, and then the second part of the name comes from the acid itself. So from this part here, we can see that something reacts with sulfuric acid and copper sulfate and water is our product. So the first name is coming from the alkali, like we said. So we know that, okay, copper is there. All right, copper is there. So meaning our alkali is going to be copper something. Okay, it's going to be a compound that's mixed with copper with something. And we know that water hydroxide is actually gotten from what? Alkali. Okay, so our product is actually going to be copper oxide or copper hydroxide, if I'm making sense. Remember, OH is normally gotten from alkali. We know that our alkali this time is copper hydroxide, if I'm making sense. And our base is obviously copper oxide. So these are the two possible products that we have there. Now, naming salts, okay? Again, I'm giving you the answer for the first one, and then you can try and attempt the next one. Now, this time we've got sulfuric acid reacting with sodium hydroxide and sodium phosphate. Remember, water is always made, most of the time, yes, when we have our alkali present, okay? In order to make salt, water is made. Remember that. It's very, very important, especially when we're dealing with a base, okay? Now, what I want you to do now is to try and attempt this question, okay? Again, I would like you to pause the video. When you're ready, press play so we can go through the answers. Marking your work with a green pen. I'm going to give you about 4 or 5 minutes to actually answer the question. Let's go. All right, I believe we are all done. So the first question is pretty straightforward. It says, when you react acid or alkali, what do you have? You know that we've got salt and we've got water, okay? Give us a mark if you got that right, and if you haven't, use a green pen to correct your mistakes. Okay, now the second question says sodium hydroxide is reacting with hydrochloric acid. Now we know that our metal from this equation is actually sodium. So we know that the salt is actually starting with sodium, okay? Sodium, and the second part is actually coming from the hydrochloric acid. So we can pretty much guess that our answer is sodium chloride. Okay, the chloride is coming from hydrochloric. Okay, the chlorine there becomes chloride, if I'm making sense. So sodium chloride. All right, so the next question says nitric acid reacting with sodium hydroxide. And what we're going to get, we know that our metal there is actually sodium, and that's the first part of it. And the second part is actually going to come from the nitric acid. So we can try and guess that our answer is actually sodium nitrate. The reason why sodium nitrate 8 is because oxygen is also present, okay? This is something you have to have in mind. Whenever I see something nitrate or carbonate, the word 8 means oxygen is also present in the equation, if I'm making sense. Now, the next one says sulfuric acid reacting with potassium hydroxide. We know that the acid here is actually potassium, so it's going to be potassium sulfate, okay? Potassium is the acid, and the second part comes from potassium is the metal there, and the second part comes from what? From the acid, okay? From sulfuric acid, and then it becomes sulfate plus water. All right. Again, you can always go back to watch the video to make a lot of sense out of it. Again, I would like you to pause the video, make your corrections, mark your work, and when you're ready, let's continue. All right, let's go through the next one. Okay. And this is the second out of the last one, actually. Now, this time it's telling us to fill in the first gap. Okay. So this time it's asking us to actually figure out what our acid is. Okay. So copper oxide reacting with copper nitrate and water. Again, pause the video, try and do this, and when you're ready, press play. All right, so let's try and attempt the question. Number 5, from what we're looking at, we're trying to find our acid here. And we know that the last part of our salt comes from an acid, and we know that this last part is nitrate. Now, let's figure out any of our acid that actually have got like nitrogen there, or sounds like nitrate, and we can try and figure out that it's actually nitric acid. Okay, give yourself a mark if you got that right. Now, the next one is actually potassium hydroxide, and our product is potassium sulfate and water. So sulfate comes from the acid, okay? So what acid actually sounds like that? And I'm sure you'll be able to figure out it's actually sulfuric acid. Again, give yourself a mark if you got it right using your green pen to make your corrections. Now, next one again, our product is chlorides, potassium chloride, and our acid that actually sounds like that is what? Hydrochloric acid. But one thing I didn't mention is actually what our base is. And this time, remember, we're looking for the base actually. So it's very important that you're very, very careful of spotting it. And we know that our base is actually potassium oxide. And the next question is now asking us, okay, to find again our base for this reaction, okay? And we've got copper sulfate and water is our product, and our acid is sulfuric acid. So the first part, remember, is actually gotten from our base. And we know that the first part is actually copper, okay? So it's going to be copper what that gives us our salt, and it's going to be copper hydroxide. Remember that OH always come. Remember that always come from the base, okay? That is how we make water. All right, it's so important. Again, give yourself a mark or use a green pen to make your corrections. All right, I want you to now spend some time, okay, to do this one. Again, pause the video. When you're done, press play. Okay, let's begin. So potassium hydroxide reacting with sulfuric acid gives us potassium sulfate and water. Okay, remember first part again. I know I'm repeating this, but it's just for it to sink in your head, for you to remember. The first part of the salt, which is potassium, always come from the base, okay? And the second part always come from the acid. So we've got potassium sulfate plus water. The next one is asking us for two things actually, which is a bit challenging. Okay, we've got magnesium oxide, which is the what? Magnesium oxide is actually our base this time, and our salt is magnesium chloride. So it's asking us to figure out what will be our acid, and the last part, remember, is always water really. Okay, obviously in some scenarios we do not get water, but it's something you're going to be learning over time. Okay, in this case, hydrochloric acid is actually the acid that reacts. Remember, the last part of your salt, chloride, is always taken from the acid, and that actually gives us a clue of what acid it is. And remember, water is our product. Okay, it's always our product in this scenario. And then this is the same thing for number 11. And number 11, copper oxide is actually our base for this reaction. Okay, and copper nitrate, that's the complete, is actually our salt. And the last one is actually even more challenging as well. Sodium nitrate plus water. What is our reactant? Okay, now our reactant is actually sodium oxide as our base and nitric acid as our acid. Okay, again, give yourself a full mark if you got it right. If you do not understand it, just make sure you're using your green pen to make your corrections as well, and also send us an email if you do not get anything. Now, we've pretty much covered quite a lot of things. No need to worry about this extension. We've covered quite a lot of things, and I would say job well done to many of you. Again, if you do not understand anything, it is so important for you to actually send us an email and ask us some questions. Obviously, these are some example questions. Again, you can write it down and make as part of your things to use for revision. So we've pretty much been able to cover quite a lot of things, and it is so important that you look over this work, and hopefully you've been able to actually develop your knowledge and you've been able to also secure your knowledge. And I'll see you in the next topic.